The story begins in Ireland with a woman named Sarah O'Neill who is returning from a walk with her son Chris. He wants a bike and gets upset to hear that it won't be possible for now, but he doesn't throw a tantrum and changes the subject. Suddenly, he screams and points at something. Sarah hits the brakes immediately and manages to steer clear just in time, checking to see if her son is okay right after. When she gets out of the car, we see that there is a person standing in the middle of the road, wearing a hood that covers her face. Sarah approaches slowly, asking if the person is okay and apologizing for the scare. Under the hood, the woman's lips move frantically in a very low whisper that Sarah cannot hear. Then the woman turns her head and looks directly at Chris, who is still inside the car. A little scared, Sarah gives up on communicating and hurriedly collects the fallen side mirror, quickening her pace to return to the car. The incident is soon forgotten, as they just moved in recently, and there are many repairs to be done to the new house. We see that Sarah tries to educate Chris firmly, but without being overly authoritative, and thus teaches the importance of rules through games. One of them is a simple game, where they count to 3 and make the worst face possible. When Sarah goes down to the basement to get a tool, Chris starts shouting for her, and she runs back up. Arriving in the living room, she finds him standing on a chair, pointing at something in fear. Then he says that another one has appeared, and knowing her son's phobia, Sarah understands that it's just a spider. She manages to capture it in a glass jar and takes it to the garden to release it, much to the boy's dismay. He fears that the spider will come back inside and thinks it would be better to kill it, but his mother says that's not fair because it hasn't done anything to him. Chris argues that the spider invaded their home and then says that if his father were there, he would do what he's asking. This subject bothers Sarah, as her son takes the opportunity to talk about the sudden move and accuses her of lying. She said that the two were going there first and his father would come shortly after, but that's not quite how it happened. Sarah doesn't respond and releases the spider, which scurries across the floor until it is suddenly squished by Chris's shoe. Very angry, he calls his mother a liar and runs into the sinister woods near the house. Sarah goes after him and doesn't even notice that there's a kind of comet crossing the sky at that moment. The woods are very dense and she loses sight of the boy as soon as she starts to venture inside, calling his name non-stop. In the middle of the woods, she finds a gigantic and very deep crater, as if something enormous had fallen from the sky right there. Appearing right beside her, Chris apologizes for running off like that, and Sarah hugs him, saying it's okay. He also finds that massive hole in the woods strange and asks his mother what it could be, but she just says it's nothing and takes him back home. The next day, Sarah goes to pick Chris up from school and sees that he has a flyer for the talent show. She encourages him to participate, saying it could help him make friends, but he responds that he doesn't want new friends. Sarah tells him that she also had to move when she was his age and ended up fitting in without any problems. This doesn't seem to cheer him up much, but she assures him that he will get used to the new life soon and they will both be very happy there. Despite this, we see that she herself doesn't seem very comfortable socializing with her boss Louise's family. Her husband is a university professor named Jay, and the chatty young man is his brother Rob. He is telling several stories at the table until he gets to a recounting of an accident, and Jay interrupts him to add in a local gossip. When Louise was 8, one of her classmates was a boy named James. One day, his mother stormed into the school to verbally assault him and had to be restrained by 3 adults. Her name was Noreen, and she spent some time in a clinic after that, but no one ever knew how to explain what was wrong with her. Jay says that, months later, she escaped from the clinic and ran over her own son, who didn't survive. Louise disagrees with the ending part, insisting that it could only have been a macabre accident. When she says that Noreen lives around there to this day and never recovered, Sarah suspects that it might be that woman who was in the middle of the road, but she prefers not to mention anything about the incident. In the middle of the night, Sarah wakes up to a sudden noise and becomes distressed when she finds her son's bed empty. She starts calling for Chris, but no one responds and the noise continues. Then she goes downstairs and sees that the sound is the kitchen door banging, as there is a strong wind outside. Still not finding the boy, she goes out with a flashlight and looks for him in the woods. It is all very dark, and Sarah gets scared seeing something that looks like it's hiding from her behind a log. She takes a deep breath and musters the courage to peek, but there's nothing behind that tree, and no one responds when she calls. Desperate, She runs back home and calls emergency services saying her son has been kidnapped. Hearing a noise behind her, she turns around and sees Chris in the middle of the living room, in pajamas and with a sleepy expression. She starts yelling at him, demanding to know where he has been, but the boy swears he didn't leave the house and asks if she is feeling okay. Fearing that she might be suffering from some mental issue, she goes to the doctor and explains that the scar on her forehead is from an accident that happened a year earlier. Without investigating much, the doctor prescribes anxiety medication and recommends taking it before sleeping. On the first night, she feels a bit uncertain, but decides to try the medication and sleeps heavily until morning. Chris is dressed and sitting by her bed when she wakes up, strangely holding a bouquet in his hands. He explains that he picked the flowers from the garden, and Sarah says that he wasn't allowed to go there alone. Seeing that he looks sad, she changes her tone and thanks him for the gift with a hug. Things then start to improve gradually, and Sarah sees that the boy is even playing with the others at school. On the way home, she asks who they were, and Chris recites several names. One of his new friends is named Stuart, and Sarah is stunned to hear that name, as Chris had previously said he didn't like that boy. He reacts strangely, as if he has been caught off guard by his mother's reaction, and says he can distance himself from Stuart if that would be better. Sarah says no, the more friends the better. Then the conversation is interrupted when they arrive at the bridge, as Noreen is blocking the way again. Chris tenses at the sight of her, and Sarah tries to scare her off by honking the horn, without success. She gets out of the car and calls the neighbor by name, asking her to let her pass, but Noreen looks at her and says, "That is not your son." Sarah's eyes widen upon hearing that, and then an older man named Brady arrives, introducing himself as Noreen's husband. He apologizes for her behavior and tries to make small talk, while Noreen begins to move closer to the boy. Very wary, Sarah cuts off the conversation and rushes back to the car. Noreen is standing at the window, staring intently at Chris's face. Suddenly, she begins to pound on the glass and scream that he is not Sarah's son. Brady runs to hold her, as Noreen is now banging her forehead against the car window with impressive force. Sarah starts the car as soon as possible and heads home while Brady tries to restrain his wife. This time, it isn't so easy to shake the incident from her mind, even with the anxiety medication. Therefore, the next day, Sarah stops at the bridge and goes to the neighbor's house, where she finds Noreen dead in the yard. Her head is buried in the ground and the birds are pecking at her back. Shortly after, the police arrive to take Sarah's statement, and she watches her son wrestling with the other guard. The boy's strength seems exaggerated for his age, and Sarah suffers a brief hallucination in which Chris breaks the man's wrist. When she returns to reality, the atmosphere of the scene changes, and it becomes clear that the officer is letting the boy win. Later, Sarah sees that her bath towel is stained, and discovers that the blood is coming from her forehead. Even so, she does her best to return to normal life, and even declines Louise's offer to take a few days off. Knowing that her boss is a mother of 3 children, she takes the opportunity to ask if it's normal to feel like she doesn't know them very well. Louise responds that it is, and states that her kids swing between angels and monsters all the time. Noreen's funeral is yet another trial for Sarah, as everyone looks at her suspiciously, knowing that she is the one who found the body. She also notices that the mirrors in the house are covered, and the mood seems more macabre than usual for the situation. Brady tries to lighten her discomfort with a drink and shows her a picture of his son, James. He says that his birth was a great joy for the couple, but everything changed when he turned 8 and Noreen began to go crazy. She became convinced that the boy was an imposter who had taken James's place, and this paranoia practically destroyed the family. However, when Sarah asks what happened to James, Brady tells another version of the accident and says that it was he himself who accidentally ran over his son. Sarah calms down with the widower's serene tone and tries once again to move on with her life, but strange things continue to happen. During a run through the woods, she finds a doll belonging to Chris near the crater and becomes almost hypnotized by the magnitude of that place. The bottom of the hole is in constant motion, as if it is continuing to sink more and more. Arriving home, she asks Chris if he has been going to the woods alone and shows him the doll when he says no, insisting that he tells the truth. He continues to say that he hasn't gone to the woods and repeats several times that he is not lying, until he finally explodes, pushing the table towards his mother. Besides his strength, Sarah is startled by the aggressive reaction she has never seen before. A little later, she walks by his room after getting out of the shower and hears a completely unfamiliar voice grunting softly, a sound so strange that it does not seem human. Hearing fast footsteps in an odd rhythm, she decides to peek under the door and is stunned by what she sees. It's Chris who is making those sounds and walking on all fours on the floor until he grabs a spider and eats it. Knowing that her son would never do that, she can't help but gasp in horror and runs into the room when Chris starts calling her in his normal voice. He asks if everything is okay and comes to her door to say goodnight, while Sarah struggles to hide the fear in her voice. She takes him to the doctor as soon as possible, but there's nothing wrong with him, and now she only has to look for more clues about the phenomenon. So Sarah hides a camera in Chris's room and starts reconsidering the medication, fearing that she might be sedated around him. That night, she has a horrific nightmare in which her son pushes his bangs aside to shove his fingers into the scar on her forehead. She wakes up to Chris humming while fixing his hair and remembers that today is the talent show at school. Louise is sitting next to her when Chris goes up on stage with the other children. Everything goes well at first, but suddenly Sarah finds herself alone in the audience, and the rest of the choir also disappears, leaving only Chris singing out of tune in a distorted voice. Distraught, Sarah runs away and tries to exit the school until Louise comes to check if she's okay. She says that is not her son Chris and refuses to talk to him when the teacher brings the boy over. Returning home without him, she checks the secret footage and seems confused by what she sees, deciding to ask Brady for help. The mirrors in Noreen's house are uncovered now, and he explains that she used them to check her husband's identity, always suspicious of imposters. Then Sarah says that Noreen was right and begs Brady to watch what the camera captured. He claims that he doesn't see anything strange in the video and becomes nervous with her behavior, throwing the camera to the ground. However, when Sarah challenges him to call her crazy, he says that he can't say that. At home, she tries to fix the camera without noticing that the boy is getting up from the armchair. She gets startled when he approaches, asking why she left him at school and saying that he doesn't like being alone. Trying a new strategy, Sarah starts pretending that everything is normal while discreetly testing the boy. He fails the first test by filling his plate with shredded cheese when she hints that's how he likes it, knowing that the truth is the opposite of that. After dinner, she says it has been a while since they played their usual game and counts to 3, hoping he will make a grimace. The boy reacts as if he doesn't know what it is, and this ends Sarah's doubts. She accuses him of being an imposter, and he makes a crying face as he approaches, asking what's wrong with her lately. Sarah keeps saying he isn't her son, and then his expression suddenly shifts from sadness to anger. Grabbing her arms, he throws his mother against the wall, and we hear her begging him to stop. Shortly after, Sarah is forcefully thrown to the other side of the kitchen and faints upon falling. The boy drags her outside and digs a hole in the yard, burying her head in it. The effort is so great that he also faints and therefore does not see Sarah regaining consciousness. She manages to pull her head out of the ground and takes him to the basement, taking advantage of while he is still unconscious to bring a mirror close to his face. What Sarah sees in the reflection is a grotesque creature, and the boy wakes up with her scream of horror. In tears, she asks what he did with the real Chris, but the imposter doesn't reply and attacks her, squeezing her neck and banging her head against the walls. With great effort, Sarah manages to free herself from the small hands and retaliates recklessly, now that she is sure that this is not her son. The imposter bangs his head on the floor and seems to be knocked out, but then suddenly opens his eyes and starts thrashing on the ground, emitting a horrible sound. Even after Sarah leaves the basement and locks the door, that shrill scream continues to buzz in her ears, and she clutches her head in agony. As that scream turns into an animal howl, Sarah grabs a flashlight and heads to the crater in the middle of the woods. All of this began when she and her son were there for the first time, and the hole must have something to do with it. Carefully, she begins to descend along the sides toward the gelatinous center, where her body starts to sink as if it were in a pit of quicksand. At first, she grabs onto the loose roots, but then realizes that the only way is to surrender, raising her arms and letting the earth swallow her. She ends up in a kind of narrow cave where it's very dark, and various vines form curtains that obstruct the way. Gathering her strength, she crawls into the den and almost gets stuck in one of the tighter parts. Pressing on, she reaches another much larger chamber, where she can even stand up. On the floor, she finds a skull partially covered in dirt and sees that there are other skeletons scattered further ahead. It's then that she finally finds her son, who is lying in the midst of these remains. She rushes to him and hugs him while something begins to moan in a corner of the cave. Taking Chris in her arms, she shines the light around and discovers that the sound is coming from a slimy, faceless being that keeps trembling. Several others begin to awaken near him, writhing out of the earth at the same time they take form. One of them opens a hole in what seems to be its head, and a ghastly moan escapes from there. Sarah carries Chris to the passage and starts to pull the boy with her, trying to reach the other side before those aberrations come after them. However, one of the beings also enters the tunnel and begins to crawl swiftly, whining and drooling all the way. When it finally reaches Sarah, she defends herself with blows from the flashlight until she feels a human hand squeezing her arm. To her complete horror, that monster has taken her form and is now staring her in the face with her own eyes. Sarah is perplexed for a moment and then raises the flashlight one last time before cracking the twins' skull. Exiting the crater, she manages to wake her son and then runs out of the woods with him in her arms. She sets him down on the ground and leans him against the car while she tiptoes into the house to grab the keys. However, upon hearing the imposter in the basement still calling for her as if he were her mother, she decides to put an end to it once and for all and sets the house on fire before leaving. Sometime later, we see that Sarah has moved to another town with Chris and has given him the bike he wanted. Everything seems to be fine, and they lead a normal life, but she still secretly photographs him to make sure it's really her son. As she fixates on one of the images, where his face looks distorted, we see that her new house is filled with mirrors, to always check her son's reflection and make sure he isn't an imposter.